What did Vladimir Nabokov think of Ernest Hemingway? And today we are going to hear from Nabokov himself on the Hemingway books he liked and the Hemingway books he disliked. And what's interesting about Nabokov is that he was not scared to throw polemics out toward other writers. And this differs from what is happening today because there are hit pieces released all the time on writers. You know, the Logic Bros or the Political Plants do a hit piece on an author, try to cancel and demean them, but who the hell is writing that piece? But in an earlier time, many writers who were famous wrote book reviews, wrote literary criticism, gave interviews where they were not scared to put down other books. And some of this was for money and some of this was for fun. And so imagine today a George Saunders or a Colson Whitehead read a book from some new voice, this new author that we all need to read who actually sucks. And they were like, dude, what the hell is this crap? And they wrote an entire Instagram post even talking about why this book sucks. We're not allowed to do that anymore. Everything is supposed to be anti-intellectual. We're not supposed to put down other people. And when you do, it's only supposed to be a certain type of individual who has become too creative, who's gone too far outside of the box. And so I commend Nabokov, and many of us, eventually, when we reach our writing dreams and have status, need to have the bravery to say, okay, well, this is going to hurt my publishing deals. This is going to maybe hurt my brand deals and whatever other monetary source. But this is important for writers to do. Because when Harold Bloom says something about Nabokov or Hemingway, I do listen because I do view him as an expert. But I'm kind of like, Harold, you never really, outside of your Gnostic novel, which wasn't good, threw your hat into the ring. And you don't have to, but it would really help criticism to have authors get back into it. And here on Right Conscious, we talk about the greatest authors and books of all time, which do include Nabokov and Hemingway. I am a big fan of both, but let us start with our first of two quotes that Nabokov made on Hemingway. And quote number one is, Ernest Hemingway, writer for books for boys, but has his moments. And okay, we'll get to some deeper analysis in a second, but this is a really great starting point because Hemingway's minimalism is a great gateway for many different types of readers. And a lot of men today do have a boy consciousness because just because you have a wife, just because you realize the corruption in the world and some conspiracies doesn't mean that you've become an integrated, individuated man. And the same goes for women. And so we are living in an adolescent society that is very self-centered and narcissistic and has no values, and everyone's ready to flip in a moment. And so that is why I feel that Hemingway has been very popular and still remains popular for who I could maybe call the halfway reader, the guy who occasionally reads but doesn't let reading and literature and art and many other things in life actually transform him. So someone who isn't just a non-reader, but the dabbler. And so I view that as boy consciousness. And Hemingway has enough depth. He has enough with the iceberg kind of symbolism underneath that you can read it and be like, wow. And he goes over many themes that kind of appeal to the adolescent mind. Fishing, war, a very type of simple love where the woman's doesn't necessarily have complex feelings or push back. And when she does, it's kind of just this irrational crazy. That is kind of the ideal world of the halfway individuated man. He's transcended grilling and chilling, but he hasn't realized the worlds of spirit within. And what's so great about this is that Nabokov is an elitist. And, when you make statements like this, when I talk about the grill and chillers and all the NPCs, people go, everyone's could come along. Dude, they don't even know they're on fucking Earth. Like, how are they going to come along when they're just doom scrolling all day with brain rot? Like, dude, we could literally get them in a center and try to heal them for 5 years and they still wouldn't know where the fuck they were. And so anyway, not to go, and I understand that this type of language can lead to eugenics, but I'm not a eugenicist. Anyway, so this is why these are the things that have been created, the barriers to growth, the barriers to actually helping people, that all the titles, all these things are in place because people actually don't want to individuate. And so back to our second quote from Nabokov on Hemingway. Here we go. As to Hemingway, I read him for the first time in the early 40s, something about bells, balls, and bulls, and I loathed it. Later, I read his admirable The Killers and the wonderful fish story, which I was asked to translate into Russian, but could not for some reason or another. And this is actually really good stuff here because here we go. So he's basically talking shit about For Whom the Bell Tolls and The Sun Also Rises, which many consider Hemingway's best novels. But I've actually been to Hemingway conferences before. I would call myself a Hemingway scholar and someone who's very interested in his work. But as time has kind of moved on, the iconic novels are really not that iconic to me, because I agree with Nabokov that The Killers, that the Nick Adams stories, and The Old Man and the Sea are Hemingway's best work by far, because he really is settling down in that simplicity and tapping into emotional depths without projecting too much of his masculinity. Because Hemingway's problems are really good. When you look at, for instance, Big Two-Hearted River or Indian Camp, or any of those stories, it's like Hemingway is like dripping his soul onto the page, even through his minimalism, if you know how to read it, and even if you don't. And the same in The Old Man and the Sea. It has a vibe. I've given that novel to some of my students back when I was in Las Vegas at an inner city school, and I had guys like who would self-identify as gangsters or thugs read that and be shocked, have like a revelatory moment and be like, wow, I actually like reading. Can you give me more stuff like this? And what do you give them? Like, cause I'd be like, oh shit. Like, what do I tell them to go and read? Because there really isn't many things like The Old Man and the Sea or the Nick Adams stories. And so that's where Hemingway is really good, is that I actually do think that he is a portal to actually manifest and move toward individuation when you read him the right way. But the war novels, the sitting around and drinking wine in Spain novels, even though they have a lot of content for a Hemingway lover like me to kind of riff on and to kind of add to the pile, I think in the long run, if we're talking about transformational literature, which I think Nabokov respected, then I think that's where it's at. Because Nabokov obviously wasn't scared to put himself out on the page. He wasn't scared to write a novel about a pedophile. He wasn't scared to write an experimental poetic criticism book in Pale Fire, and he wasn't scared to be a polemicist. And so I think he sees and knows Hemingway's problems, and when he lets those out, when he lets his mommy trauma out, when he lets, or I should say, shows kind of the shadow of his hypermasculinity and the source of that in kind of the more internal books and stories like A Way You'll Never Be. Because if you think about that short story, I would read that, you guys. Go read A Way You'll Never Be in Big Two-Hearted River if you haven't. You can find a free PDF online. Nick Adams is basically just laying in a hospital bed, just kind of reminiscing and like doing these things and slowing it down, removing the grandiosity in these things, I think does play to Hemingway's strengths. And you kind of see that in his posthumous novel, The Garden of Eden, because in that one, which he was actually writing at the same time of like The Old Man and the Sea, he was dealing with like androgynous characters and the reversing of gender roles and the ideas of sexual transference and like all this crazy shit, which, you know, for a guy like Hemingway is beautiful because it's subverting a lot of his previous beliefs and identity. And as a writer and as an artist, you should always be doing that. And for someone who was like that, you know, writing about that in the 1940s and 1950s, that was very, very progressive. And so I think that Nabokov would have respected that. I think that he would have really gotten a kick out of that one, because in terms of Hemingway analysis, like that is a gold mine. And if you read it with an open mind, I think it is a transformational novel. And so what are your thoughts? Do you guys think that Nabokov is right? Do you guys think that I'm crazy? I love Hemingway, but I do think that he is one of the many stops along the endless train that lit bros and others take instead of getting off the train and kind of trekking on their own journey. But hey, there will be some more Hemingway content soon. This is actually inspiring me to do some more on both Nabokov and Hemingway, and I will see you guys very soon in those videos.